Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 286, and in the main event, we have a welterweight title fight, Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman 3, and this is going to be my full breakdown and prediction for this fight, and I am so excited for this trilogy fight, and honestly, you don't get much more of a compelling storyline than the trilogy between Edwards and Usman, because we're going to talk about the rematch in detail later in the prediction video. But to have Kamaru Usman, the reigning, defending, and dominant welterweight champion, go out there against Leon Edwards in the rematch back at UFC 278, back in August of 2022, to go out there and look like he's about to coast to a decision win over Leon Edwards. And then in the last minute of the 5th round, Leon Edwards snatches victory from the jaws of defeat, lands a brutal head kick KO, and takes the welterweight title from Kamaru Usman. Unbelievable performance by Leon Edwards, unbelievable comeback. And now you have Kamaru Usman, who had never tasted defeat in the UFC, attempting to come back 6 months later with no fights in between, and he's going to attempt to regain his welterweight title. And for Kamaru Usman, this is must win. I know all fights are must win, especially when they're title fights, but for Kamaru Usman, he's getting up there in age. And if he loses twice in a row to Leon Edwards, where's his future in the welterweight division? And there's some people speculating if Kamaru Usman loses this fight, he may retire from the UFC. So Kamaru Usman's in a tricky spot within the welterweight division. And for Leon Edwards, a lot of people are calling that head kick a fluke. A lot of people are saying he got lucky. He doesn't deserve to be champion. And people were doubting him, saying he didn't even deserve the title shot before he got the fight to begin with. And he has an opportunity to prove here that it wasn't luck, that it wasn't a fluke. I don't personally believe that anyway, but I do understand the context of the fight, which we'll talk about later in the video. But Leon Edwards has something to prove in this fight. But for Kamaru Usman, he has to show, okay, can he still be champion? Will his confidence be rattled after getting put out in the fashion that he did? And also, how is his chin going to hold up? Because a lot of people get KO'd, and the next thing you know, they're never the same. The chin is never the same. So this is such a compelling fight. Anytime you have a dominant champion lose their belt, and then in an immediate rematch, attempt to come back and regain their title, I think those are the most interesting storylines. But you add the layer that Usman was winning the majority of the second fight up until he got finished, and it was in the last minute of the 5th round. That just makes it so much more compelling, and I am really looking forward to this fight. So if you look at the tail of the tape for this fight, you have Leon Edwards, who is 20-3. You have Kamaru Usman, is 20-2. Edwards is the champion. Usman is the #1 contender. Edwards is 31 years old. Usman is 35 years old. Edwards is 6'2". Usman is 6 foot. Edwards has a 74-inch reach, and Usman has a 76-inch reach. So if you look at Kamaru Usman, of his 20 pro MMA wins, 9 by knockout, 1 by submission, 10 by decision. Of his 2 losses, he's lost once by KO or TKO, which was the fight against Leon Edwards, the last fight, and once via submission way back early on in his MMA career. His last fight was against Leon Edwards back at UFC 278 back in August of 2022. We're going to talk about that fight in more detail later in the video. The fight before that, he defeated Colby Covington at UFC 268. This was a competitive fight. It was majority standing, and Kamaru Usman won the fight with his striking. He rocked Colby Covington early in the fight. Some people say it should have been a draw. It was a good competitive fight. I thought Kamaru Usman clearly won. The fight before that was the rematch against Jorge Masvidal, where he brutally one-punched KO'd him in the 2nd round. That's back at UFC 261 back in April of 2021. The fight before that, he defeated Gilbert Burns via TKO back at UFC 258. He went out there, he faced some adversity. He got hurt early by Gilbert Burns, but he came back and he was able to weather that storm, and he finishes Gilbert Burns in the 3rd round. The fight before that, he fought Jorge Masvidal on short notice, like 50-40 for him. I just out-grappled him in this fight, beat him up, out-grappled him, and made Jorge Masvidal look like he didn't even belong. The fight before that, he TKO'd Colby Covington. There's some controversy around the stoppage. Amazing fight. A lot of striking that went on in this fight. And eventually Kamaru Usman gets the finish in the 5th round. And then the fight before that, he took the belt from Tyron Woodley. A lot of people did not expect Kamaru Usman to win this fight. I was one of the very few people that was confident that Kamaru Usman would take the belt from Woodley. I know that sounds crazy now, but back, all the way back in 2019, it wasn't like that. And Kamaru Usman went out there and dominated Tyron Woodley, out-grappled him, beat him up for 5 rounds, and took the belt from Tyron Woodley. And Kamaru Usman has been active since he's been champion. One of the most active champions. He fought twice in 2019. He only fought once in 2020. But then he fought 3 times in 2021. And then he fought once in 2022. He got KO'd, so I understand why he took the time off. And now he's going to return for a trilogy fight with Leon Edwards. And I forgot to mention in the beginning of the video, he is going into Leon Edwards' backyard in the UK to try to regain his title. This is such a compelling fight. But Kamaru Usman, the only other loss on his resume is via rear naked choke. This is all the way back in May of 2013. That's how long it had been since Kamaru Usman suffered defeat. He was undefeated in the UFC. He beat guys like Damian Maia, Rafael Dos Anjos to get his title shot. Absolutely dominates Tyron Woodley and then has a decent title reign. I know a lot of people complain, oh, he's beating blown up lightweights because he beat Gilbert Burns, who's a former lightweight, and he beat Jorge Masvidal, who's a former lightweight. He was beating these guys in very impressive fashion. So I think a lot of people skim over Kamaru Usman's title reign and say, oh, it wasn't that great. Those 2 wins over Colby Covington, I think, are great wins, and one of them by stoppage, and we know how durable Colby Covington is. So I think a lot of people kind of underestimate Kamaru Usman's title reign. I think he has a very good title reign. Looking at Leon Edwards, of his 20 wins, 7 by knockout, 3 by submission, 10 by decision. Of his 3 losses, 2 by decision and 1 by disqualification. That was long before the UFC. I have no idea what that disqualification was from. That was all the way back in February of 2012. Outside of Kamaru Usman, he has not lost since 2015. That is the only loss on his resume since 2015 is to Kamaru Usman in the first fight. And then he worked his way back. He went on a winning streak. And people kept saying he doesn't deserve a title shot. After UFC 263 where he fought Nate Diaz, people were saying he doesn't deserve a title shot. He got the title shot and he capitalized on it. We're going to talk about the trilogy fight here in a minute. That's obviously his last fight back at UFC 278. The fight before that, he fought Nate Diaz at UFC 263. And I really do feel bad for Leon Edwards because going into this fight, it was a weird fight already. And then they decided to make it for 5 rounds. And Leon Edwards beat the brakes off of Nate Diaz. But he's supposed to beat the brakes off of Nate Diaz. And then in the last round, the last minute, similar to the trilogy fight against Kamaru Usman, he gets rocked by Nate Diaz. And Nate Diaz, instead of going after him, he just taunts for like 10 or 15 seconds. And I think he gave Leon Edwards an opportunity to recover there. I think had Nate Diaz just immediately put the foot on the gas, there is a chance he could have defeated Leon Edwards in that 5th round. But because that happened, even though Leon Edwards won a fairly dominant decision win, people only remembered Nate Diaz rocking him at the end of the 5th round. And it was kind of like, oh, he almost lost to Nate Diaz, who's kind of a journeyman, not even a real welterweight. And people just kind of discredited Leon Edwards. The fight before that, he fought Bilal Muhammad. He fought Bilal Muhammad on short notice. He accidentally eye-pokes Bilal Muhammad in a fight that he was winning in the 2nd round. Bilal cannot continue. But in that fight, Leon Edwards looked very good, and we know how good Bilal Muhammad is. The fight before that, he won a unanimous decision over Rafael Dos Anjos, out-grappled him, outstruck him, and he went on this long winning streak, but not against the best names. I mean, we're talking Donald Cowboy Cerrone, Gunnar Nelson. Rafael Dos Anjos is a solid win, but then he had the no contest against Bilal Muhammad, and then the win over Nate Diaz, which was clouded by that 5th round punch by Nate Diaz. And people were saying he doesn't deserve a title shot. But what people forget, he accepted a fight with Jorge Masvidal back at UFC 269 that Jorge Masvidal pulled out of. And he also accepted 3 fights with an unranked Khamzat Chimaev. People forget about that. He was supposed to fight him, I believe it was in December of 2020, then in January of 2021, and then in March of 2021, he was supposed to fight Khamzat Chimaev. Ultimately, those fights didn't come to fruition. I think one time it was on Leon Edwards' side, and then the other 2 times it was on Khamzat Chimaev. But it's not like Leon Edwards is out there turning down fights. He's accepting fights. He's calling. At one point, Dana White tried to put together Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. Colby Covington didn't want the fight. So even though now the fans are kind of siding with Leon Edwards, oh, he dethroned Kamaru Usman, look at this crazy KO. People were saying going into that fight that he did not deserve a title shot. I couldn't have disagreed with him more because he is an elite level fighter. Even though the level of competition wasn't great, it wasn't really his fault. So now looking at that trilogy fight, what can we take away from that trilogy fight? Actually, let's talk about their first fight real quick. They first fought all the way back in 2015. That's Leon Edwards' last loss on his MMA resume. This fight they were both very early on in their career, and essentially Kamaru Usman just out-grappled him in this fight. Both guys are vastly better in their skill sets since then. Kamaru Usman's striking, it isn't great now. It looked horrendous back in 2015. I think both guys have improved vastly, but Kamaru Usman basically out-grappled him to a decision. There's not many takeaways you can take away from that first fight because it was, 8 years ago. Now, if you take a look at the trilogy, back at UFC 278, what happened in that fight? Outside of the first round where, Leon Edwards' takedown defense held up pretty good, and then he went for kind of like a weird trip or like a headlock position where he was trying to snap Kamaru Usman down. He ended up on his back. Kamaru Usman ended up on top of him, landed some good ground and pound shots. Then Leon Edwards got back to his feet, and eventually in the clinch position, Leon Edwards trips Kamaru Usman and ends up in full mount, and then ends up on his back looking for a rear naked choke, but ultimately wasn't able to do anything with it. Outside of that first round, which you can give to Leon Edwards, I honestly think you could make a case for Kamaru Usman. I would give it to Leon Edwards, but you could make a case for Kamaru Usman because of the ground and pound shots he landed versus Leon Edwards didn't really land any shots once he was on the ground. But you also have to take into account Leon Edwards landed some very good kicks early on in that first round as well. But outside of that first round, you basically had Kamaru Usman swarming him with combinations against the fence and then shooting in on takedowns and taking him down repeatedly. Leon Edwards would work back to his feet and then he would take him back down, beat him up against the fence. He would work his way back to his feet, disengage the clinch. Kamaru Usman would use his striking to swarm him, beat him up against the fence, and then shoot in on another takedown. And he did this for the second, third, fourth, and even fifth round. And in the fifth round, it seemed like Kamaru Usman had took his foot off the gas a little bit. He was clinching up with Leon Edwards, kind of just holding him there, not really doing much. And I believe it was like at the 2.5 minute mark, maybe the 3 minute mark, Herb Dean separates them. And Herb Dean separates them, and then little do you know, 2 minutes later, the last minute of the fight, Leon Edwards kind of feints a jab with his left hand. Kamaru Usman looks to dodge it by leaning and eats a massive head kick and goes to the shadow realm. It was one of the most brutal KOs I've ever seen. It was one of the most shocking KOs I've ever seen. So now you have to look at that fight, and it's weird to try to look back at that fight and decide who's going to win this fight because, okay, well, if you look back at the first 4 rounds of that fight, Leon Edwards was good in the first round, not great. And then the rest of the fight, outside of the head kick, it's lackluster. It was an uninspired performance. And I know you had the commentary team writing Leon Edwards' obituary and saying he was definitely going to lose and he was resigned to losing a decision. It looked that way. That was an accurate description. And that head kick, while it was set up great, it was just crazy. And it was one of those things where I know a lot of people are calling it a fluke. He set it up. It's not a fluke. But what are the chances that that happens again? But you also have to take into account, and I think this is a massive factor that people are not taking into account when they're looking at this fight, is what they learn in that trilogy. Leon Edwards is going to build on what happened in that fight. He now gets another opportunity, and I know that's kind of weird to say, but I'm just saying, to put on a better performance against Kamaru Usman. Because in that third fight, or in that second fight, he was pushed up against the cage. He was eating shots. He got outstruck in this fight. Leon Edwards is supposed to have a massive striking advantage, but because of the threat of the takedown from Kamaru Usman, he was being outstruck. He was being backed up against the fence. But I do think Leon Edwards will build on that performance. And you also have the X factor where people said, it was in Salt Lake City. Leon Edwards' cardio wasn't great. He went there weeks beforehand to acclimate. I think this is just a kind of an excuse. The UFC is kind of building it up as a storyline. Well, because of the high elevation, because of the cardio issue, Leon Edwards, that's why he didn't look himself. He was getting out-grappled in the second round, okay? Let's be honest here. And also, Leon Edwards did get tired in the 5th round against Nate Diaz. And I know he had a high output there, but I think Kamaru Usman's pressure is what led Leon Edwards to be as tired as he was and to be as uninspired as he was in that fight. I don't think you can 100% rely on the elevation there. I don't think you can do that. I think it's a bit of a cop-out. I think it's a bit of an excuse. But ultimately, he pulled off the win. But it's weird because I think he's going to build on that win, even though he had a bad performance. And I think he's going to come back even better in this trilogy. He's the younger fighter. He's not coming off a brutal KO. You have Kamaru Usman. What is his confidence going to be like? Does he trust his chin coming into this fight? Because I look back at my prediction for the second fight back at UFC 278. My prediction was almost spot on. I thought that Kamaru Usman would mix in the clinch, mix in the grappling. I thought he would have success on the feet. And I thought he would win a decision. And I thought it was going to be a pretty clear decision. Now, obviously, he got KO'd in the 5th round, in the last minute of the 5th round. But my assessment on the fight was pretty accurate. But now Leon Edwards is going to make adjustments. I also think there's things that happen in that second fight that a lot of people forget about because of the KO. And a couple things I wanted to highlight. Leon Edwards had very good leg kicks early on. He was throwing oblique kicks. He was throwing heavy leg kicks. He was also feinting the knee a lot to try to, bait Usman into not shooting in on takedowns, try to deter him from shooting in on takedowns. But people just remember the head kick KO. So I think Leon Edwards has some things that were bright spots in that fight. He was able to get back to his feet. Kamaru Usman, even though he was able to get him down repeatedly, Leon Edwards has very good grappling, was able to find his way back to his feet. And if he can refine those things, he may very well defeat Kamaru Usman in this trilogy fight and keep the belt. But it's hard to look past what Kamaru Usman did in that second fight back at UFC 278. It's hard to look at the success he had on the feet. It's hard to overlook the fact that he was able to take him down at will. It's hard to look over the fact that Leon Edwards got tired and Kamaru Usman didn't. And I know he got caught in the 5th round, but I do think it was still a very good performance for Kamaru Usman. And I think, can he replicate it in this fight? It's going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult because coming off that KO, where's his mindset? That is the most relevant X factor in this fight. What is his mindset like? But ultimately, I think that KO is going to lead Kamaru Usman to build on some things of his own. I think he's going to be play it a little bit more safer in this fight. And that's why my official prediction for this fight, I am going Kamaru Usman via decision. I just think I can't ignore the takedowns. I can't ignore that last fight. That was only 6 months ago. And Leon Edwards is a very good grappler when he's not fighting other really elite grapplers. He can out-grapple a guy like Rafael Dos Anjos, who gets out-grappled by the majority of guys at welterweight. Okay, like Colby Covington, and so on. And I think in this fight, 6 months later, I think the way Kamaru Usman will fight this fight, I think he'll be a lot more safer. I think there'll be a lot of clinching. I think there'll be a lot of takedowns. And I think Kamaru Usman was so comfortable in the feet because his striking has evolved. And his striking has got so much better over the past few years. It's still not great, but I think he got way too comfortable in the feet. I think he got too complacent on the feet. And I think in this fight, not only will he look for the takedowns, I think he will prioritize control. In that second fight at UFC 278, he was kind of trying to get damage off, and that was leading to Leon Edwards getting back to his feet because he knew, I can strike with him, I'm landing on the feet, I'm ripping to the body, I'm landing good combinations, and I'm getting him back down to the ground. So I'm not worried about it. I think in this fight, because he knows he must win this fight and he must avoid getting KO'd, and the confidence probably is a little bit shaky, I think he's going to be heavily grappling. I think he's going to prioritize ground control, and I think it's going to be harder for Leon Edwards to get up off the bottom in the fashion that he was doing in that second fight. I do think Leon Edwards has a massive striking advantage, but will that striking advantage show because of him worrying about the takedown? We saw that in the second fight. He's worried about the takedown. We see this throughout many of MMA fights where the better striker on paper gets outstruck by kind of like a grappler wrestler type guy because of the threat of the takedown. And I think Kamaru Usman's going to come in, push him against the fence, take him down, beat him up, prioritize control, land some ground and pound, then control him some more. Leon Edwards is going to have trouble getting back to his feet. I think it's going to be a very draining fight. I think Kamaru Usman is more motivated than ever. He knows that this is his last chance because if he loses to Leon Edwards again, he's probably not going to see another title shot. And I think all that motivation, it's hard for me to believe that just because of what happened in that second fight, just because he got KO'd, he's not going to be able to use the strengths that he used in that second fight. And I think he will go out there and win a decision win. I think for Leon Edwards, he has to be more aggressive in this fight. I think he has to keep chopping the legs, because what happened in that second fight was he was so worried about the grappling and the takedown. He was just backing up and he wasn't throwing a lot of combinations. And after the first round, where he had some good leg kicks early on, we really didn't see any more of those throughout the fight. And even throughout the fight, I just recently rewatched it. There was only one other head kick thrown by Leon Edwards outside of the one that KO'd Kamaru Usman. And that other head kick could have potentially been a body kick. It was hard to see from the angle. And also Kamaru Usman was kind of leaning down into it as well and blocked it with his forearms. But there was only one other head kick in that fight. So I think you have to see a more aggressive Leon Edwards. He has to be more confident in his ability to get up. And I think also he has to work on using some of those strikes that make the takedown difficult, feinting those knees, feinting those uppercuts, throwing them as well. In the second fight, he used knees to try to stop Usman from shooting in on takedowns. And what we saw Usman crowd him with combinations, back him against the fence. He would clinch with him and then move to his takedown. And his ability to get Leon Edwards down against the fence is what shined in this fight. And I think he'll be able to do that again. I think he'll fight a lot more safe. I think the cardio is still an advantage for Kamaru Usman. I think the grappling is still an advantage for Kamaru Usman. I think that'll help Usman set up the striking, but I don't think he's going to do a whole lot of striking in this fight, just because he knows this is his last chance at a title. If he loses this fight, he's not going to have another opportunity. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Who are you picking, Leon Edwards or Kamaru Usman? Again, I am going Kamaru Usman via decision. I think the fight will be competitive early. I think Usman will face some resistance in the first, second round maybe. But I think as the fight goes on, Kamaru Usman, with his grappling, with his suffocation of his pace, I think he will win this fight. And I think as the rounds go on, he's just going to get more and more control time. And by the fourth or fifth round, you're going to see a Leon Edwards who's getting taken down, who's tired, who's getting control on the ground, beat up on the ground. And I think you're going to see Kamaru Usman maybe a 49-46 decision. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.